Good morning, Gretchen Ho. We're coming to you on this Monday, on the third day of November, bringing you Morning Matters because your mornings matters. Get to the stories that matter today. Severe tropical storm Tino intensifies as it moves southwestward over the Philippine Sea. It is forecast to make its initial landfall over eastern Samar, Leyte, or Dinagat Islands by midnight or tomorrow early morning and may reach typhoon category within 12 hours. Canada assured the Philippines that it stands with the nation in protecting its territories, including the West Philippine Sea. This assurance comes as the Philippines and Canada signed a Status of Visiting Forces agreement on Sunday. The Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM2, raises alarm over the country's worsening literacy crisis. Data from the latest Functional Literacy, Education, and Mass Media Survey shows the number of functionally illiterate Filipinos nearly doubled to 24.8 million in 2024. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about issues you need to know for the rest of your day. Now, first on the agenda, President Bongbong Marcos returns from South Korea with fresh investment pledges and new partnerships following the 32nd APEC summit. Here's the report.
President Bongbong Marcos described his participation in the 32nd APEC summit in Gyeongju, South Korea as very productive. The summit focused on the use of artificial intelligence and climate change mitigation amid economic challenges and regional tensions.
I'm going home, all of us are going back to Manila with a lot of ideas to think about and some work to do to develop those ideas.
On the sidelines of APEC, the president met with major South Korean firms, including tech giant Samsung, which plans to invest over 50 billion pesos to expand its manufacturing operations in Calamba, Laguna. The project is expected to generate more than 3,000 jobs.
Buti na lang, meron na tayong batas na Create More. Because within the new Create More Act, there is a threshold where we say that if there is an investment of over 50 billion pesos in the country, then they are qualified to be extended incentives and tax exemptions. So they committed to that.
Samsung will also implement technology transfer and workforce training programs in the Philippines, partnering with select universities for research and skills development. A supplemental agreement was also signed between the DTI, PEZA, and Samsung Electromechanics Philippines Corporation.
Yung mga trabaho na binibigay ng mga companies na to, medyo on the higher level. So that means maganda ang pasweldo. So napaka-importante sa ating Pangulo.
President Marcos likewise held talks with shipbuilding leader Hanwha Ocean for the modernization of the Philippine Navy, and energy firm DL Group, which aims to partner with Meralco for a small modular nuclear reactor project in the Philippines. The president also met with Chilean President Gabriel Boric to finalize the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement before the year ends. It will be the Philippines' first free trade agreement in Latin America. Before returning to Manila, President Marcos visited the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan to honor Filipino soldiers who fought in the Korean War.
The Philippines and Canada formally signed a Status of Visiting Forces agreement over the weekend to further strengthen their defense and security partnership. Here's the report.
The Philippines and Canada signed the Status of Visiting Forces agreement on Sunday. Defense Secretary Gibo Teodoro met with Canadian National Defense Minister David McGuinty in Makati City for bilateral discussions on expanding military collaboration and strategic partnership.
Canada and the Philippines are natural allies.
From economic development to cybersecurity to humanitarian assistance and disaster response, disaster risk reduction and resilience, Canada and the Philippines share a lot of common interests.
Canada also assured that it stands with the Philippines in protecting its territories, including those in the disputed West Philippine Sea.
To remember that Canada has been and remains resolute in support of Filipino sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Teodoro also addressed China's accusations that the Philippines is a troublemaker following joint military exercises with the US, Australia, and New Zealand.
Those exercises were held in open seas, in the high seas. where there is freedom of navigation and no one country controls that area.
The Philippines currently has visiting forces pacts with the US, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, while dialogues are also underway with France.
NAPOLCOM has ordered an investigation into a Bacolod police officer who surrendered and confessed to killing 42-year-old Christine Joy Dignadice. Her blood-stained car was found abandoned in Hinigara, Negros Occidental on October 29. The officer, whose name was withheld, pointed investigators to the victim's remains as SOCO and a special team began recovery operations. Motive has yet to be established. In a separate development, NAPOLCOM will issue a show-cause order to a Halloween partygoer who wore a police uniform, citing possible violations under Article 179 on illegal use of uniforms. In other news, the Manila Police District reported that the observance of Undas 2025 in Manila was peaceful and orderly. According to the MPD, more than 1.3 million people visited cemeteries in Manila for All Saints' Day, with the Manila North Cemetery drawing the largest crowd at over 1 million visitors. The MPD deployed over 800 police personnel to manage the flow of people, enforce inspections, and secure the premises. The police also monitored 21 bus terminals and the Manila North Port, assisting nearly 1,938 passengers traveling for the long weekend. Coming right up, functionally illiterate Filipinos nearly doubled to 24.8 million in 2024 based on the latest functional illiteracy, education, and mass media survey. Let's discuss this alarming matter with the Philippine Business for Education Executive Director Hannibal Camua. When Morning Matters returns, keep it here on One News. Good morning, I'm Gretchen Ho here in Morning Matters. We talk about the most pressing issues and give you the context behind the headlines. The Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM-2, has raised alarm over the worsening state of literacy in the country. The number of functionally illiterate Filipinos nearly doubled to 24.8 million in 2024. That's based on the latest Functional Literacy, Education, and Mass Media survey. Now, during a hearing, EDCOM-2 said the Department of Education's involvement in 261 interagency bodies, up from 63 earlier, diverts focus from improving learning outcomes. Education Secretary Sonny Angara noted that DepEd chairs at least 20 of these bodies and co-leads 21 others with SHED and TESDA. He added that the department's growing mandates often come without sufficient funding. DepEd said it is limiting participation to high-impact councils and hiring administrative officers, so every public school will have one by 2026. EDCOM-2 has stressed that easing teachers' non-teaching workload is key to addressing the country's literacy crisis. And to get more insights on the country's growing literacy problem and the challenges faced by the education sector, we now have on the show Philippine Business for Education Executive Director Hannibal Camua. Magandang umaga po sa inyo.
Good morning, Ma'am Gretchen. And good morning din po sa lahat ng tagapakinig ng Morning Matters.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
24.8 million functionally illiterate Filipinos, a number that the EDCOM2 has said has nearly doubled in the past 30 years. Help us appreciate this number first because meron na rin pong lumabas back in May of 2025 na 18.9 million. That was from 2019 to 2024. Does that mean that grumabe siya in the past, in the recent years compared to the past 20 years? How do we see this number?
Well, I think what the reference that EDCOM2 in their recent press release is actually from that FLEMS results then way back in April 30 or early May. They're actually referencing to that. But the point of, let's say, what they say here that it has doubled for the past 30 years was also during the time when the first Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM1, was established. The number was actually at around 14 million functionally illiterate. So it has doubled from since, no? From the past, during the time ng EDCOM1, for around 14 million lang yan. So ngayon, it's around 28 million, no? During that release of the FLEMS in early May, the 19 million na functionally illiterate na sinasabi, it's actually accrued, parang ano siya, no, raw interpretation siya from that of, because they changed the definition of functional literacy for that iteration of the FLEMS, no? Tinaasan yung criteria. And hence, medyo delikado yon na i-minus lang, you subtract, let's say, the functionally illiterate nung previous version versus now the new definition or the new version. So kaya doon na-derive yung 19 million. Pero medyo hasty po yun, or medyo spotty yung ganoong analysis.
Pero ito pong sinasabi ng EDCOM2, ano na po yung definition ng functional illiteracy dito? Are they using the new definition? And can you remind us what that is about again?
Yes. So sa bagong definition which was used this year, no, it's a higher level definition wherein kapag functional literacy yung pinag-uusapan, dapat able to read, write, comprehend and have some basic, no, problem solving, let's say, metric. So hindi katulad yan dati na sa previous definition niya, read, write, and comprehend. Tapos napasama na dapat at least, kung high school graduate na, at least high school graduate, automatic functionally literate. Hindi na po ganun yung definition ngayon. Sa bagong definition, dapat you must be able to read, write, comprehend, and compute. No? Regardless kung hindi na po natin sinama na automatic yung high school graduate. So kaya doon din po lumobo din po yung number of functionally illiterate natin ng mga Pilipino.
So ibig sabihin ito pong bagong definition at yung mga datos po, kasama na rin ho ba yung mga hindi talaga nakapag-aral? Or are they just measuring here the ones in the educational system?
Kasama po yung mga hindi po nakapag-aral at hindi po nakapagtapos din ng pag-aaral. So I think the age range here is around 10 to 64 years old.
And which test was used to measure functional literacy?
The functional literacy, itong FLEMS survey is done by the PSA. So comprehensive po ito ng Philippine Statistics Authority. And particularly yun po is it's also us, no, yung PSA stepping up because one of the major critique of the previous versions of the FLEMS is hindi siya up to international standards. Kaya merong mismatch. Let's say for example, bakit sa mga previous version ng FLEMS yung ating functional illiteracy is at this level, pero kapag binangga mo siya sa international, let's say, assessments, let's say for example like PISA or TIMSS, mababa. So ngayon, and that's the reason why there was this adjustment na kailangan higher level learning ang sinusunod at minimeasure kapag nagme-measure tayo ng functional literacy. Pero again, this is a very alarming figure, and from us in PBED, sinasabi namin that ito po ay isang manifestation of the ongoing learning crisis in our country. 24 million is not, hindi birong number po yan. 24 million Filipinos functionally illiterate. So, ibig sabihin, mahihirapang maghanap ng trabaho, mahihirapan po yung, let's say, to create economic opportunities in the country as well.
So ito pong phlegm survey, hindi pa po siya nasa international standard, yung itong latest one?
So, ano na to?
Updated
at least
na din.
sinabay nila because of the updated definitions.
And then, how is the test done? Because there's also a mass media exposure component to this. Is this magsusulat talaga o pakikipag-usap ito?
I'm not really familiar, Gretchen. I'm sorry. I'm not really familiar with, let's say, the test administration, no? Because particularly this is done by us, what I've said, ng PSA. Pero I think this is a combination of several survey methods. Let's say, for example, merong tests, and I think you're correct. There would be some form of let's say, writing to measure, let's say, comprehension and also computation.
O parang hindi pa po kasi umaabot sa akin yung phlegm survey na yan. I mean, is this, pag working ka na, hindi ka nakasama rito. I mean, is this 18 below or just to understand the demographic?
So the age range is 10 to 64 years old. And I think the PSA is doing this nationwide. And I think baka hindi tayo nasama sa sampling because I wasn't able to be part of this or to be a respondent of this. So there's a sampling method done by PSA.
I guess we have to ask throw those questions towards the PSA to be able to understand that. But now we go to the functional literacy and the causes. We know we've talked about this many times, but this is the first time that it's been brought up that the DepEd is involved in many interagency bodies, more than 260. How does this manifest in their everyday work?
So, given that number, 261 interagency membership, and almost 30, I think, 30 of that they are leading or co-leading with the other education agencies, makikita na medyo wala sa focus, no? Nawawala sa focus yung ahensya. Particularly, it adds to the workload, not only of the agency at the national level, but more so, it is manifested na yung additional workload na yan sa mga teachers at sa mga schools. So let's say, for example, those functions or ng interagency bodies like on drug, let's say, awareness on drug use, even on DRRM, na nakaupo sila. Also, teachers are doing, let's say, tasks on supplementary feeding, even on vaccination programs with the Department of Health, other functions as well during elections. So, nandyan yan, no? So, my take there is parang it takes away time from the agency, from DepEd, and from the teachers to really focus on what they need to deliver, which is on learning outcomes, which is on particularly literacy, no, and numeracy ng ating mga learners. So, it's a manifestation, no, of, let's say, nawawala sa focus ang ating mga DepEd as an agency and our teachers who are implementing all these interagency functions that DepEd and other education agencies are doing.
To be able to put specifics to that, no, apart from the drug use, the feeding, the vaccination programs, and the elections, kasama rin dun, meron pang vision screening, meron pa yung 4Ps, meron pa yung DSWD, DOH, DRRMC, at marami pang iba. Malaki po talaga yung tiwala natin sa ating mga guro. Pero at some point, you gotta draw the line. How do you see this being managed more effectively if even in terms of staffing, we are lacking in guidance counselors for one? Paano kaya ma-unburden ang mga teachers, do you think that administrative officers will be able to do the job? Because DepEd says it plans to hire AOs.
Tama po, meron din pong plano ang DepEd to, let's say, para mapunan yung ganong pagkukulang, especially at the school level, to hire additional administrative officers. The target, I think, is all schools dapat at least merong isang administrative officer. But then if you're going to look at it at the school level din kasi, no? Ang isang administrative officer, ano ang kanyang functions? Kapag nag-hire ng isang administrative officer ba, it will cover all those functions ba that are actually mandated by all this interagency leadership and memberships na kasama ang DepEd? Because by the end of the day, ang nakasanayan dyan, and the challenge there is yung i-break yung nakasanayan na everything data gathering on vaccination, on let's say on 4Ps, si teacher kaagad yan. But then hindi natin nakikita na it takes away time for teachers. The teachers would teach, let's say, for around 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours. In some schools, mas mahaba pa dyan because of shifting of classes. After ng turo, magle-lesson planning pa yan. So there are a lot of tasks, and nandyan yan, no? Nasa pag-aaral po yan ng DepEd na majority of ng DepEd at ng EDCO na majority of our teachers are already overburdened. While the administrative officers, having administrative officers will help, I think it's really to streamline, no? To streamline this interagency leadership and membership na kasama ang mga ang DepEd at education agencies. Streamline it and make sure na yung membership ng DepEd, ng CHED at ng TESDA is on the education focus only. No? So let's make sure na member sila ng mga interagency bodies na to, but focus on education. Hindi na nagiging miyembro sila because sila yung may kakayanan na maglista, sila yung may kakayanan na pumunta sa mga nandoon yung presence nila sa local government.
Pero paano ho kaya, no? Siyempre, naiintindihan ko po yung sinasabi po ninyo. Pag nag-hire ka ng administrative officer, effectively, kung isa lang yan, managerial load lang yung matatanggal niya off the weight of, or off the backs of the teachers. They will still be the ones doing the hard work of doing yung personal I guess administration to the students, no. Pero do you propose that all of these functions be removed from the school setting, moved away, or how do you make that na they will be more focused on education and learning when nandito nga po yung sa periphery yung mga services na yan na kaakibat nung pag-aaral.
So I think it's not really removing or I would say it's not really removing or tanggalin lahat ng mga interagency functions na ito, no? Because there are really also there's those interagency functions that are really serviced on education and learning. But I think making sure na itong mga memberships ng education agencies natin, particularly ng DepEd, on these bodies are actually the name of streamlining and efficiency. Hindi na kasama ang DepEd dyan kasi sila yung may kakayanan, sabi ko nga, sila yung may kakayanan maglista, sila yung may kakayanan mag-reach out until the barangay level. Because we should also think about that local governments are also there. And that's the reason why, for the longest time, PBED has been advocating for this decentralization of education. Dapat we empower local governments more to lead, let's say, education initiatives. No? And we make local governments as well accountable for learning outcomes. Babalikan ko lang, Gretchen, yung kaninang sinasabi natin about functional literacy. Top 10 na nakalagay doon sa functional illiteracy na survey released last May, top 10 provinces nakalagay doon. 8 are in Mindanao. If I am a governor of that province, tapos ako'y nasa top 10, but then I have a very, very little to, let's say, minimal influence on, let's say, education outcomes, aligning of curriculum, so and so, those things are actually planned at the central level, or at the national level. So I could I think as our governors or our local governments right now, wala silang masyadong power, no, to influence, really contribute to education programs to make sure na yung kanilang mga lokalidad ay naaabot yung mga learning outcomes ng mga mag-aaral. For those who had the resources, pwede yun, they can do that. But how about for those who are also limited with resources? And again, evidence would show us that functional illiteracy results nung April would show us that those who are actually also top 10 in the functionally illiterate ng mga provinces are also those who are provinces na napakataas ng poverty incidence.
Secretary Angara, I think echoes your call for a more localized structure for education. But how could this be devolved to the LGU but still remain, I guess, national standards for education? Paano kaya? Ano kaya yung maaaring maipasa sa local government?
Yep. I think now you hit it right on the head of the nail. No? Na sinabi na yung direction setting and curriculum, let's say, should remain with the national level. Kasi syempre direction setting yan central office yan. Pero I think just in terms of procurement, no? Construction of classrooms, every time na lang na nagkakaroon tayo ng opening of classes, ano yung mga top 3 na problema? Number 1, kakulangan sa classroom. Why don't we do procurement and classroom construction at the local level and make local governments accountable on, let's say, classroom construction? That's number 1. Second is on teachers. Ang dami nating kakulangan sa teachers. 165,000 na backlog on teachers. Bakit? Why don't we make local hiring of teachers, hiring of administrative officers na sinasabi natin, also localized, that it's the local government that will determine, no? Titingnan natin dito sa lokalidad nila, ano bang mga guro ang kailangan? STEM teachers ba? PE teachers ba? Guidance and values education teachers ba? Sila yung nakakaalam nun eh. So dapat sila yung merong kumpas on teacher hiring. And third is on textbooks. Textbooks and also learning materials procurement. So, dapat sa local level din yung procurement niyan. Kasi kung sa national level yung procurement, and we all know this, doon nanggagaling yung problema because national level yung procurement, tapos yung logistics sa pagpapadala niyan, yung pagde-deliver ng libro, nangangalahati na yung school year, we're almost halfway to the school year, but there are still schools na hindi pa nakakatanggap ng kanilang mga libro. So just on those top 3 issues, if we can empower local government units to have more stake on those issues and empower them and make them accountable at the end. So I think it's a good start for decentralization or devolution of education.
As a final question, there are other Southeast Asian countries which have been very successful when it comes to their own education sector. Our neighbor for one, like Vietnam, has been registering high functional literacy rates. What are they doing right? And what can we pattern after? At kamusta yung ibang mga neighbors po natin, katulad na Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Singapore, and Laos?
On Vietnam, I think EDCOM2 did a benchmarking study in Vietnam like a year ago or almost 2 years ago, and what they found out was there's a lot of Filipino teachers there. Ang daming mga Pinoy na teachers doon. So if kung madaming Filipino teachers doon, so I think it speaks of the let's say yung compensation or yung treatment natin or the opportunities that we give to our teachers, no? Though may mga nakasalang na mga, let's say, priority legislations to make sure that our teachers are compensated well, may mga teachers ba din talaga tayo na nagkakaroon or that would grab the opportunity to, let's say, be employed abroad. Pero mahina din yung ating pipeline of teachers. So let's say, for example, nagkakaroon ba tayo or meron ba tayong datos na out of the 165,000 na pagkukulang sa mga teachers, kasama ba doon yung mga nangingibang bansa? At ano yung pipeline natin? Meron ba tayong program na magsusupply ng mga teachers in the next 3 years na pinoproduce ng ating, let's say, teacher education institutions or ng mga colleges and universities natin dito sa Pilipinas. So that's number one, no? What are they doing, right? They're taking care of their teachers, providing them with good compensation and benefits package. That's number one. Second is, I think, in the case of our neighboring countries, they have always put education as a priority. Titingnan natin yung education spending nila versus our education spending. For the longest time, no, hindi natin na-meet yung at least 4% of the GDP should be allocated to education. While this year or for next year's budget, sinasabi na umabot na siya ng 4%. But kami sa PIBED, we're still asking, ano yung naging computation? Bakit paano tayo umabot ng 4% of the GDP? Is that computation just focus on DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, or does it include all other education, quote-unquote, no, ng mga activities ng other agencies? So I think investments, titingnan natin gaano kalaki ang ini-invest ng ating gobyerno on education alone, and apart from investment as well, how well or how efficient do we allocate those investments? Are we allocating those investments in those areas that contribute directly to learning outcomes? Let's say, for example, sa kakulangan ng textbook, kakulangan ng mga guro, at internet connectivity, let's say, or digital resources. So I think that yun yung mga ilan sa mga ginagawa ng ating mga karatig bansa like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia na I think we're still quite lagging behind.
Making it a priority and also putting the appropriate resources into those priorities loud and clear. We have Philippine Business for Education Executive Director Hannibal Camua explaining to us the latest report from the PSA, 24.8 million functionally illiterate Filipinos in the past 30 years. Maraming salamat for helping us appreciate the context behind those numbers. Thank you very much for your time.
Maraming salamat din po, Ms. Gretchen, and to your team. Thank you for having me.
Up next, severe tropical storm Tino is forecast to become a typhoon within 12 hours as it continues to intensify over the Philippine Sea. All that and more when Morning Matters returns after a quick break. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here in One News. In weather, Tino intensifies further while moving west-southwestward over the Philippine Sea. Its center was last spotted 430 kilometers east of Guian, eastern Samar. Tino packs maximum winds of 110 kilometers near the center and a gustiness of up to 135 kph. The severe tropical storm is expected to make its initial landfall over eastern Samar, Leyte, or Dinagat Islands by midnight or tomorrow early morning. It will continuously intensify and may reach typhoon category within the next 12 hours. Signal number 2 is up over parts of eastern Samar, Bohol, Agusan del Norte, and Surigao del Sur, as well as Leyte, Biliran, southern Leyte, Camotes Islands, Dinagat Islands, Surigao del Norte, including Siargao and Bukas Grande Islands. Meanwhile, the following areas on your screen are now under signal number 1. And for more weather updates, we have Pagasa weather specialist Munir Baldomero. Welcome to Morning Matters.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, and good morning to all the viewers. So currently, all the information mentioned earlier are in effect as of the moment. So currently, we have a rainfall advisory number 7 issued at 5 a.m. today. So due to the effects of Tropical Cyclone Tino, so more than 200 millimeters will be expected over eastern Samar and Dinagat Islands, while 100 to 200 millimeters within the next 24 hours will be experienced over Surigao del Norte, southern Leyte, northern Samar, Biliran, and Samar Province, while 50 to 100 millimeters of rainfall will be expected over Sorsogon, Camiguin, Agusan del Norte, Bohol, and Cebu. And due to the effect of the shear line, so the eastern section of Luzon and Calabarzon, particularly Aurora and Quezon, will experience 50 to 100 millimeters of rainfall. As of today, hail warning is in effect over the eastern seaboards of Visayas and Mindanao and the eastern and southern seaboards of southern Luzon. So, mariners and motorbangkas with similar sized vessels are advised to take precautionary measures while venturing out to the sea and if possible, avoid navigation under this condition. So we expect that the this tropical cyclone Tino will continue to intensify and may reach typhoon category within the next 12 hours. And rapid intensification are likely within the next 24 hours. And the possibility of tropical cyclone Tino to reach super typhoon within the next few hours is not ruled out. And after landfall, tropical cyclone Tino may slightly weaken during the passage over Visayas and will remain in typhoon category throughout the forecast period. And that's the update here in Pag-asa Weather Forecasting Center. Munir Baldomero reporting.
Munir, hindi mo nabanggit ang Metro Manila, no? Ano kaya ang aasahan namin na pag-ulan ngayong araw?
Yes po. So for Metro Manila, so in-expect po natin na possible po na yung itong trough nitong tropical cyclone Tino ay maaari po magdala na light to moderate to at times heavy rains over Metro Manila within the next few hours and also by tomorrow morning.
But in terms of yung lakas po ng bagyo, the pack winds of Tino, gaano kalakas yan?
For now, yung maximum sustained winds ni Tino is umabot ng 110 kilometers per hour and possible po na yung sa mga areas po is by later this 11 or by 5 p.m. once Tino reaches typhoon category, possible po tayo magtaas ng wind signal number 4 over the eastern section po ng Visayas and eastern section po ng Mindanao.
Okay. Munir, tayo ay nasa amihan season compared to the past where we saw the habagat bringing rains to different parts of the country kahit na medyo malayo yung tropical storm. Help us understand, pagdating sa amihan, ano yung movement ng winds? Meron din bang ganong paghila at pagdala ng ulan na malayo dun sa severe tropical storm? Paano ba madalas pagka amihan season?
Yes po. Usually pag amihan season, ang dala po na hangin nito ay drier pati cooler na hangin. So in-expect po natin na less yung humidity na dala po nitong hangin. So possible po na hindi po siya magkukos ng enhancement ng mga pag-ulan or pag-enhance ng mga bagyo dahil po sa amihan. Kundi possible po na yung paghina ng bagyo since wala po siyang fuel na ma-feed doon sa bagyo. So mas possible po mag-weaken yung mga bagyo na dadaan during amihan season.
Okay. And how many more tropical storms or low pressure areas are we looking at for the month of November?
So for the month of November, based on climatology, around 2 to 3 tropical cyclones ang in-expect within the month of November, and for the whole year hanggang December, we have 3 to 5 tropical cyclones.
So kukonti na lang, no? So brace yourselves, no, for one of those 3 to 5 tropical cyclones. In the meantime, maraming salamat sa iyong weather forecast for today. We have Pag-asa weather specialist Munir Baldomero. Don't go away. We got more matters to discuss after a quick break. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here on One News. A new report by Climate Rights International has raised alarm over human rights violations and environmental damage caused by nickel mining in the Philippines. The country is the world's leading exporter of raw nickel ore, a key component in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. The report found that communities near nickel mines in Dinagat Island and Surigao del Sur are facing severe impacts, including pollution, deforestation, and the destruction of farming and fishing livelihoods. Residents said the loss of forests and mangroves has made them more vulnerable to flooding and typhoons, while mining-related siltation has contaminated drinking water sources. The watchdog said poor mining practices are worsening food insecurity and climate risks, urging the government to halt new mining permits, strengthen enforcement of environmental laws, and ensure fair compensation for affected communities. Now, joining us on the show today, we have Krista Sheno, researcher at Climate Rights International. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Matters. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, first of all, tell us about your work and Climate Rights International, your group, and what led you to this research.
Yeah, thanks so much. So Climate Rights International is an international human rights and climate research and advocacy organization. So we document the human rights impacts of the climate crisis and advocate with governments, with companies to advance justice for impacted communities. So this is actually our fourth report that CRI has done on nickel mining. We have released 3 reports on nickel in Indonesia, the world's largest producer of nickel, and this is our first time reporting on the industry here in the Philippines.
Because we are the number 2
Exactly.
producer of nickel in the world.
Yes.
My first question to you this morning was, how come I don't feel that we are number 2?
Yeah, I think a big piece is that most of the nickel that's mined in the Philippines is exported, with over 90% being exported to China and the rest going to Indonesia, Japan, and South Korea. So most of the mine that's is mined here is not processed here, so that value addition is not necessarily impacting local communities.
That means this is a commodity that the Philippines can actually leverage, right?
Yeah, particularly as the world's second largest producer. So this is, a really vital mineral, including for EVs and for batteries. And we're seeing a demand in new nickel because of electric vehicles. And so, just to be upfront, it's absolutely important that we stop burning fossil fuels and transition to renewables.
Correct.
But it's also important that communities on the front line of these mining projects are not sacrificed along the way.
Before we go to the findings of your research, I want to first understand how vital nickel is, because I know that we're moving away from nickel cadmium batteries. Is that correct? How is nickel present in the current lithium ion technology?
Yeah, so there's different types of EV batteries. So a lot of major Chinese electric vehicle companies like BYD don't use nickel at all in their batteries. But the majority of EV companies still do and will continue to do so. So one of the purposes of using nickel in EV batteries is to essentially prolong the range so you can have more charge and drive much farther. And so for a lot of reasons, there'll probably be different types of batteries in EVs in the future. So just because some companies are moving away doesn't necessarily mean that all companies will move away.
Well, nickel is also being used for the production of stainless steel.
Exactly.
Right? No, it's that vital. All right, let's go now to your research. What have your findings been? And did you center on a particular location or nickel mine in the Philippines?
Yeah, so we focus on the Caraga region, so in northern Mindanao. It's home to more metallic mines than any other part of the Philippines. And so this is really, in a lot of ways, the heart of nickel mining in the Philippines. We interviewed communities in Dinagat Islands as well as in Surigao del Sur who described the ways that nickel mining is impacting their lives. People reported, first and foremost, that nickel mining is actually making them more vulnerable to climate change. This is something in the hearts of people in the Philippines, as we're seeing with Tropical Storm Tino. Many of these communities are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, a global problem that they did very, very little, if nothing, to contribute to. Yet the impacts of mining is making communities more vulnerable through the destruction of mangroves and forests that protect people from tropical storms like Tino, as well as increased siltation of rivers from mining runoff that makes it more likely to overflow and to flood. We're also hearing lots of issues with human rights abuses, and so particularly the ways that nickel mining and related pollution is not only impacting the environment but also impacting the rights of local communities. Fisher folk and farmers report that their livelihoods have been completely destroyed and difficult to continue fishing and farming. We're hearing cases of food insecurity where people no longer have enough food to eat because of the destruction of their livelihoods and the economic impacts to into their environment. We're hearing cases of severe water pollution threatening people's right to water, as well as issues on people's right to health because of pollution. And so really we're seeing these types of impacts across the board in communities across the Caraga region.
Are they at least limiting the mining to specific zones? How terrible is the deforestation that's happening there?
Yeah, the deforestation is quite significant. There are requirements that mining companies replant areas after they've mined them, but we're not always seeing that is being done fully, or that perhaps they're replanting with non-native species. And so the deforestation, particularly in its link to flooding, as you deforest a mountain, you're more likely to have flooding events because those trees aren't there to kind of withhold the rain and lessen the impacts. And so we are seeing that these mines are kind of occurring across the region. Dinagat Islands, particularly Dinagat Island, is a mineral reservation, so the whole island is really susceptible to mining. And so a big piece of this is not just one specific mine, but really the cumulative impacts of having so many mines so close together.
And what this image right here, where is this area?
This is in Malino, Barangay Malino in Tubahan and Dinagat Islands. And so this is an inlet, going to the sea where there's, nickel mines on both sides of the inlet. So the communities that are living in Barangay Malino are disproportionately impacted by, mining that's on both of the mountains above them.
Are people still able to live here? I mean, in which areas?
Yeah, so right over here is where people live, and so people do live there, and that's where their homes are. And I would say that particularly
many of them displaced.
I mean, I think a lot of people live here, and this is where they've lived. These are economically very, low income parts of the Philippines where people don't necessarily have the money to relocate if they want to. So when we were doing, visiting people and in the field, this area had been super impacted by Super Typhoon Odette back in 2021, and still some of the people living in this barangay are using tarps as their roofs. Their houses were destroyed over 3 years ago, and they still don't have the economic impact to recover from that, let alone relocate to another place.
And speaking of that, many of those who participate in the mines actually have no other choice but to make this their livelihood. Would you know how much they earn in a day? Is it at least equitable for them?
Yeah, we interviewed people who told us they make below minimum wage working for some of the mines. And I think one of the really critical pieces is that, the promises of good mining jobs haven't actually offset the loss of other income from fishing and from farming, particularly when you have the destruction of fisheries and of farmlands, including rice fields that are now flooded with waste and sediment from the mining areas. People aren't able to offset those losses with their mining jobs. Many of these mines take a break during the rainy period to avoid, catastrophic disasters during dangerous seasons, which makes a lot of sense. But for temporary mining workers, that leaves them without employment for months at a time. And then when they go home and their fisheries are dead and the farmlands are destroyed, they have a really difficult, supporting their families through this period of the off season.
So they try to balance more than one livelihood.
Yeah, a lot of people are forced to. So, we interviewed people who've been forced to leave because they can no longer sustain themselves. And, just the impacts, are quite significant.
And how is nickel mined exactly? Would you know best practices around the world?
Yeah.
And our practices at par?
Yeah, so how nickel is mined in the Philippines and other tropical countries like Indonesia is through open pit mining. The nickel is close to the surface of the earth, so you access that through open pit mining. So the complete
just
destruction.
Get it like that.
Exactly. And so that can have tremendous impacts on the environment and on, of course, local communities. The good news is there are a lot of laws and regulations on the books in the Philippines that would prevent many of these harms. It's more of a piece of enforcement of those environmental regulations, including making sure that mining waste is properly managed, that areas are rehabilitated after they're mined, and importantly that local communities have a stake at the table, that they're able to participate in consultations, that indigenous peoples have the right to say no through free, prior, and informed consent. And so really it's not a technical question of how do you reduce the impact on the environment. A lot of it is a political will and an actual policy question.
And what is the local government doing about it? They're supposed to be the ones holding these companies accountable?
Yeah, so in some cases, local governments are really working with local communities, and in other cases, local communities feel abandoned by their local governments. So I wouldn't say there's a uniform thing that's happening or not happening. So, there's a lot of different layers of government and of people who have are able to take action. Of course, at the local government level, at the national government level, including the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the Mining and Geosciences Bureau, but also looking at where this nickel is going. Like I said, most of it is leaving the Philippines. It's being exported, where it's then turned into stainless steel, into batteries, and so I think it's also really important that those downstream users, those EV companies, do more to make sure they're not sourcing nickel from places like this where it's causing severe impacts to local communities.
But are they not trying to somehow penalize these companies that have not been responsible when it comes to managing the impacts of the open pit mines?
Yeah, so that's definitely happened in the past, but one thing that we're hearing from local communities is they feel like there's a lack of accountability for the harms that are going on. So in Surigao del Sur, there was a 16-year lawsuit against a mining company over the impacts of the environment that was just settled last month or the month prior. So these are, really a long period of time to be uncertain over the impacts and accountability. And so really, one thing that we're calling on in the recommendations for our report is, really timely responses from the national government, from local government, when communities have concerns.
And do you have numbers here as to the extent of the impact, like economic losses, jobs affected in terms of agriculture and fisheries? Would you have
so
data?
The way that we do research and our methodology is to interview people who are directly impacted. So rather than providing a dollar amount or a pesos amount on the impacts, really we center on the testimony of people themselves. So throughout the report, there are quotes from people who are directly impacted, putting the impacts in their own words. So really highlighting the fact that this is, these human rights abuses are not this, untangible thing, but they are impacts directly on people in their lives.
Is your proposal, what is a better way to approach nickel mining? I mean, because many of these miners have made that their way of living for a long time. They live in these communities, and I guess they would always ask, what's your alternative? Like, what other forms of livelihood can we do if not this?
Yeah, I think a big point is that with this report, we're not saying no mining ever. What we're saying is that mining cannot be an excuse for human rights abuses, both of workers and of local communities. And so some of the recommendations in the report include doing investigations by national governmental entities into mining companies, making sure that they're not harming the environment and not harming the rights of local communities, and importantly making those investigations publicly available and accessible to local communities. So in some cases we're hearing that there are investigations, that there are reports happening, but if they don't they're not informing people at the local level, then there's a huge breakdown.
Yes.
And so it's really important that
what kind of abuses happen?
Yeah, I think a really big piece is around both the impacts of pollution on people's rights, but another thing that we're hearing a lot is the impacts on environmental defenders. So the Philippines is the country in Asia that has the highest rates of murders for land and environmental defenders, and the links to mining industry are quite significant. So also throughout this report, we've documented cases where there have been violent attacks, criminalization, including strategic lawsuits against public participation or SLAPs, cases of red tagging, and other cases of intimidation and harassment of people who speak out against this problem. And so it's not only the direct impacts of itself, but also those who are speaking out, who are working to protect the environment, are also facing personal risk for doing so.
Just like how we started the interview, we do know that mining is still vital to our industry and to the way that technology is going, our push for renewable energy. How can we strike a balance where we make this sustainable for communities?
Yeah, I think an important thing is, mining is always going to be somewhat damaging to the environment. When you're talking about cutting trees and removing soil, there will always be an environmental impact. But what is not necessary are these impacts on communities and human rights violations. So like I said, there are plenty of laws and regulations on the books already that if they were fully implemented would prevent many of these harms from happening. It's also important that mining companies themselves are ensuring that their operations aren't contributing to significant environmental pollution, as we're documenting in this report, and also the role of downstream companies. The companies that are using this nickel in their EV batteries are really wealthy global companies that could pay a premium and could demand higher standards. Many of these, global North electric vehicle companies have, supplier code of conduct and policies essentially claiming that they will not source minerals that are, mined with human rights abuses. And so I think it's really important that the international community and EV companies in the global North also wake up, because they have a role to play here and a responsibility to help address this issue.
In your year here in the Philippines, what has struck you the most? I mean, is there a conversation or a memory that you, or an image that you won't forget that you'd like for our lawmakers to see? Yeah,
I highly encourage going to this barangay Malino in Tubahan. Really on the road driving into the barangay, you see mining roads, going up out into the mountains. The tire tops of mountains have been mined. And the road even to access the barangay is pretty dangerous. It has lots of potholes. And I think to understand that this is such a major industry locally, but these are the conditions for the local community, that they don't even have paved roads, the medical care is not up to par, and just the reality of the dust they're breathing in and the everyday life for people is so difficult. We interviewed a fisherwoman from this barangay who, for years had been a crab trapper. She in the mangroves would catch crabs, and she was saying that now it's so much more difficult to find any crabs, and when they do find them, they're much smaller, and when you break them open, their bodies are filled with red mud from the mining area. And so I think, of course there's economic impacts, but also these are human impacts, and I think.
And where do they get their food then?
Yeah, and
they can't get it from there.
So some people are reliant on debt, so they're buying food from local markets using debt that they're hoping one day they'll repay. We interviewed people in Ayoki Island off of Cantilan in Surigao del Sur. So this is a fishing island, and when seas are too high, historically they would be able to catch fish right off the shore, but now all of the fish are dead because of pollution from onshore nickel mining. And so one man told us that him and his family will go days where they only eat breadfruit because it's too dangerous to go out to sea and there's no fish to catch locally. And so I think really understanding that this is a real human problem, and that again these human rights abuses are avoidable and are not happening necessarily in other places like they are here.
As I've said, there are many issues here that we don't have visibility on. So I think it helps that you are sounding the alarm on this. And particularly these images that often go viral online show us the reality of how it is down in the local communities. And what's ironic, I think, I've been to one of the mines, but this in a gold mine in Paracale, is that even if these communities are rich, it's not the locals that are benefiting from that. So we hope this makes a huge impact and somehow opens the eyes of those who can enforce our laws better. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have Krista Shanong, researcher at Climate Rights International. This report comes out tomorrow,
yes.
Entitled Broken Promises, from Climate Rights International. That wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you the right start to your morning. Let's go ahead and make the day matter. My name is Gretchen Ho. Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time.